Added fats are probably the biggest driver of obesity. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today, but a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, be greatly appreciated. If you are not following or subscribed, please do so, and if you would be kind enough to drop me a comment down below, I would appreciate that. So thank you so much. So let's get over to this topic. Obviously, obesity is multifaceted. We can argue a lot about different types of refined carbs, refined sugars, hyperpalatability, calorie excess, and these are all valid points. But if we really want to narrow it down to the biggest single factor, it's still going to be added fats to your diet. Now, I think something that has to be said there, people will point out, well, you know, what about all these low-fat products? And they were just full of refined sugars, and people were still getting obese. It's like, because they were still full of refined fat. They were still full of added fats. So people have this weird idea that they take this junk food, right? You'll take this junk food and got all sorts of butter and oils and refined flour, like white flour, refined sugars added to it. And so you just reduce the amount of oils and stuff in it and replace it with some sugar that is still not a high-fat food, full of just refined garbage and added fats. Like, they're still there. And at the end of the day, when we start adding added fats to foods, if we have refined sugars in it too, we're going to have a problem, right? And it almost doesn't matter the ratios, because as long as we're getting excess calories from hyperpalatability, the fat we eat stores. And there comes a point where you look at it and go, yeah, so sure, you're not storing carbohydrate for the most part as body fat, definitely not under the skin, even refined sugars. But are they adding calorie density? And do you still have significant amounts of fat in the diet? And even worse, do you have butters, oils, all these things, like even beef tallow? That's garbage. Like, this is nonsense. Frying foods in beef tallow, it's an added fat, just like butter, just like the oils. It's all going to make you fat. I'm not going to get into an argument of oxidative stress. We're not going to get into an argument of inflammation. Let's just talk body fat. They're all going to make you fat. And I think they're going to be relatively equal there. Sure, we could argue about different levels of fat oxidation from certain types of fats and different chains versus others. Push come to shove, we're getting a big calorie excess with a lot of added fats. But at the end of the day, you're always going to have more calorie density from the fats. And this is what we have to think about. And always added fats. So what I call added fats means, does the food come like that? Right? Or is it just the fat found in the food? Because a lot of times people say, well, what about some of these others? Well, those are somewhat refined. Like, they're adding extra fat to stuff like sausage. These really, really fatty cuts of pork that they're making sausage and then bacon out of, those are still almost, they really are an added fat because they've trimmed protein out. So anytime you start trimming the protein away from an animal source food, guess what? All that you're concentrating the fat, you end up with an added fat. I would almost count like bacon that way still. Okay, butter, absolutely 100%. Beef tallow, 100%. These are just added refined fats at that point. Yes, they are refined. Doesn't matter that it's minimally refined. They're just pure fat calories. This is what makes you fat. Same thing with all the oils. And a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this. It doesn't matter that there are certain health benefits to certain oils. Okay, are we going to argue that extra virgin olive oil doesn't have health benefits? Of course it does. Doesn't mean one of those health benefits is that it's going to make you lose weight. At the end of the day, it's liquid fat. We are taking added fat calories in a hyperpalatable state and adding them to stuff. You dump a bunch of olive oil all over stuff. In terms of the weight gain potential, you're not going to see much different from the butter. You're not going to see any difference from canola oil. Like, they're all going to be hyperpalatability, where you're making foods taste better by adding more fat. Fat adds flavor, makes you want to eat more, has the highest calorie density. Incidentally, it's also what we store, but we could still make the case that, you know, if refined sugars and refined carbs are high enough, we're going to get into a surplus anyways. And so any of these fats you're throwing in, they're generally going to store at that point. So even if you have more or less of one, if you're just replacing those same calories with, say, refined sugars, and you're still eating the same calorie surplus, and that calorie surplus is equal to the fat intake, you got a problem, right? So if you're adding 400 calories of refined oils and butters and other stuff to your diet and you're in a surplus, you're pretty much storing that, okay? For them up to a certain point. But I think people forget there's a limited amount of fat we can gain in a day. It's very, very little. I should almost do some videos on that. Like, people really have this crazy idea that you're going to gain 3 pounds of fat in a week. You're not. You're not. 2 pounds is pushing it. Like, we've seen a little over a kilo in the lab in a week. But man, you got to be eating like 5,000 calories with a bunch of junk in there to pull that off. I'm not saying it hasn't been done under laboratory conditions, but to reach those sort of numbers, you're at maximum capacity of your GI tract, right? And that's why it's not limitless. People are going to say, but if the calorie surplus, you can't have a calorie surplus past a certain point. You just start pooping it out, okay? You're just pooping liquid calories out at a certain threshold. You can't absorb 10,000 calories in a day. Sorry, you can't do it. And you're probably moving around and doing other stuff. And bigger people versus smaller people, like, well, the smaller person, they don't have the same absorption capacity. Okay, they haven't built up a larger GI tract and everything else. They don't have a bigger frame, so no, that doesn't work either. They have a limited capacity. But the point here is that this small amount adds up. Like a small surplus plotted out, right? So if you're gaining a pound a week, even if you're gaining half a pound a week, that's going to really add up. Well, the biggest drivers of that is going to be for most people the refined and the added fats. The oils, the butter, all of that adds up. And for most people who are not at the most extreme ends of morbid obesity, you can almost certainly attribute their entire calorie surplus and fat gain to those foods. And most of those people, if they simply cut all of those out, took the creamer out of the coffee, quit putting butter on stuff, quit adding oils to things, all of it. Just quit putting added fats, quit buying foods with added fats. Most of them would stop gaining weight. Okay? They cut out the refined sugars with it, most of them start losing weight. And it's just, it is what it is, right? So the added fats are probably, for most people, the biggest driver. I'm going to say they're the biggest driver for everyone. For some people, they're probably the primary driver. Like, they may not be any other factors in terms of their net calorie surplus. So again, this is the stuff that you really need to be aware of and what we honestly need to cut out first and foremost if we want to tackle the obesity epidemic, right? These are the things that need to be trimmed out. And then refined sugars, are a close second.